Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the 12th Asia Regulatory Conference. I'm Sarah Adam from IFPMA. Thank you for joining us. We are very happy to have you with us for this third day of the Asia Regulatory Conference. Next slide, please. For today's conference, we are planning to have two hot topics for the region. A first session will be on e-labeling and universal labeling, and the following one will zoom in advanced therapies, medicinal product, and combination product. And before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Next slide, please. The full program and speaker details are available on the website at arc.ifpma.org. To ensure good quality of the audio, all participants are muted. We invite your comment and question during the different sessions. So please use the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there and we will try to address it during the discussions. You could also like or upvote a question if it has already been asked. So Zoom polls will be used during the sessions and this will appear directly on your screen. We encourage you to share your views, and this tool doesn't require a smartphone to respond. To the sessions, you will also see resourcing or further readings appearing to complement knowledge shared by our speakers and panelists. And last, all our sessions are recorded and the materials will be made available after the conference on the IFPMA ARC website. In case of any technical issue, please write to us, and we look forward to your participation. Next slide, please. So for this first session of day 3, we will get insights of the use of e-labeling and opportunities to further harmonization and better interoperability in the region. In addition, the session will open a dialogue on the concept of universal labeling in the context of an evolving digital healthcare ecosystem. And without having any delays, I'm inviting Van Lee Shao from Pfizer Malaysia to take the floor. Ms. Shao, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Wan Lee. I'll be together with Tam. I will be your moderator today in today's session. Welcome back to day 3 of Asia Regulatory Conference organized by IFPMA in partnership with Medicines Australia. Before I hand over to our presenter, allow me to introduce our speaker today. Our first speaker, Rie Matsui. Rie Matsui is a Senior Director, Regional Labeling Head of APAC, International Labeling Group, Global Regulatory Science, Pfizer Japan. She is also the Head of External Engagement for ILG and Co-Chair for Pfizer E-Labeling Center of Excellence. She is the founder of Asia Labeling Hub at Pfizer, which has created various local label updates for more than 25 countries in Asia ever since its launch, and she worked with 15 affiliates in Asia. She is the lead of APAC E-Labeling Expert Working Group and the Program Chair for DIA Global Labeling Conference. She has also received various awards and published her work in scientific journals. Without further delays, I would like to hand over to Rie. Rie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Wan Lee, for kind introductions. So let me get started my presentation. Current status of e-labeling in Asian Pacific and what is on the horizon. Next slide, please. This is today's agenda. Next slide, please. So firstly, I'd like to talk about what is e-labeling? There is no single universal definition of e-labeling across regions. However, in general, there are 5 aspects. As a first important step, the latest product information is available online. Then we should consider improving accessibility with using QR code or GS1 code so that healthcare professional and patient can access to trusted labeling by a code on the pack. The other aspect is to eliminate the paper labeling from the commercial pack. At the end of the day, e-labeling should be available as a structured content based on the International Common Electric Standard, which is HS7 Fire. The Fire e-labeling should be interoperable with the other healthcare systems, such as e-prescriptions and e-health record. Next slide, please. So let me speak about the benefit of e-labeling. There are a lot of benefits. One of the most important benefit is faster sharing new product information. The most updated labeling can be delivered to HCP and the patient. Due to using the machine-readable code, such as QR code, HCP and the patient can access the accurate product information directly. So they don't need to search the product information on the internet. Our labeling is long enough. We can search the necessary information in the e-labeling easily. E-labeling should be used as a part of digital health in the future. Next slide, please. So let me share the use case of e-labeling for COVID-19 vaccine. During the pandemic, instead of inserting a paper labeling, e-labeling has been introduced for COVID-19 vaccines. QR code was put on the carton and the user can scan the QR code, then it directed to the landing page. There was a drop-down list by countries, and then the labeling is available as a PDF. So around 70 market labels were available on that website at that time. And then the labeling was updated approximately 1 to 3 times per month for the first 6 months after the product was launched. So it was not possible to deliver the most updated information if we just provided the paper labeling in a commercial pack without e-labeling. Next slide, please. So when we discuss e-labeling, we need to understand what the labeling document in the commercial packs are. The first and the second picture were taken in Europe. The labeling in the commercial pack is written for patient. The third picture was taken in India, and then labeling in the commercial pack is written for HCP in general. So depending on the country, the pack may contain healthcare professional information, for example, Japan, US, and Asia, or patient information, for example, Europe. And then before removing a paper labeling as a part of e-labeling initiative, the company must complete the package risk assessment for e-labeling because paper labeling acts as a cushion and may protect product from light. So next slide, please. The other point to consider, the patient labeling for majority of the products are not prepared in Asian regions. Only 30% of the market in Asia do have a patient labeling guidance, although US and EU countries do have a guidance or regulation for patient labeling. So currently, the adoption of e-labeling is mainly for healthcare professionals in Asia, but e-labeling should be used for patients as well. Next slide, please. That slide shows e-labeling initiative in Asia. There are a lot of progress of e-labeling in this region. So as you can see, 8 markets have issued e-labeling guidance document. There are a couple of the trends of e-labeling in Asia. So health authority websites are used for e-labeling. QR code is put on the carton, and the e-labeling is available as a PDF by a QR code. And the paper labeling can be eliminated from the commercial pack for some products, but it is still voluntary basis, except for Japan. Next slide, please. So let me speak about e-labeling initiative in each market more. In Japan, the PMD Act was amended to replace paper labeling. Could you please click? The GS1 code is used for access to e-labeling. The paper labeling has been eliminated from the commercial pack. The custom XML is available now. The next in Singapore, please click. The HSA issues the final guidance on e-labeling in April 2021. And then the company voluntarily implemented e-labeling where the physical labels are not distributed. Please click. TFDA announced the guidance for using e-labeling with paperless in 2023. And furthermore, fire e-labeling is planned to introduce. And as for Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, the Health Authority also issues that e-labeling guidance document. And like a Singapore, e-labeling initiative made voluntary basis. Next slide, please. So having a labeling information only available as a PDF file is restrictive as they are unstructured. The file cannot be used digitally. So in the future, it would be good to create the labeling in a common electric standard, which is HL7 Fire, offers huge opportunity for further digital transformations. So the e-labeling, Fire e-labeling can be linked with electric health record and e-prescriptions. Then the personalized label could be made. So could you please look at the right-hand side? With that Fire standard format, by using computer language, computer could easily access to the required information and using application or AI to generate what we need. So please look at the right-hand side, upper right-hand side, that shows that iOS app of Apple, it can convert data to message for drug reminder. The below shows another applications. It converts the data into image. It will be convenient for different customers. In Asian countries, Fire adoption has been progressed in the healthcare system. If the Fire is introduced into e-labeling, e-labeling can be integrated into the digital health in the future. Next slide, please. So let's see, the Jordan FDA app use Fire to support accessibility and a multimedia feature that should improve patient acceptance. The patient can control text size, colors, and add highlight. Text to audio and sign language are available. Screen navigation with AI. Face tracking shows where you see. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. As a next step in Asia, we encourage the increased uptake in availability of e-labeling. More companies, more products, more e-label. We also advocate for implementation of Fire e-labeling as a common international standard across Asia. And then we encourage the important introduction of patient-centric e-labeling. Lastly, we will discuss universal label for sustainability at the next session. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rie, for the insightful presentation. Before we progress to the next session, can I request for a short poll survey to understand, to understand the audience experience on e-labeling? Thank you for participating. Okay, now let's take a deeper dive into this topic in a panel discussion. We are glad to have 3 panelists today representing different sector, from regulators, industry, and our patients representative. First, I will Probably I will let Carla, I will invite Carla to introduce herself. Carla, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much to everyone for having me here today. Good morning, good evening. I'm Carla Cartwright with Johnson & Johnson, and I lead global digital and regulatory policy based in Washington, D.C.
Next, I'll invite Monica Ferry.
Hello, everybody. I'm Monica Ferry. I'm the Chief Executive of the Genetic Support Network of Victoria, Australia, and that's an organisation that supports people living with genetic, undiagnosed and rare conditions. I'm also the Treasurer of the Asia Pacific Alliance of Rare Disease Organisations, and I'm a Council Director of Rare Disease International.
Thank you, Monica. And last but not least, we have Tony Manderson.
Hi, I'm Tony Manderson. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at TGA in Australia, and labelling and sort of sits under my permit, and I've been in this space for quite a long time. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. All right, so from the presentation, from Ria's presentation earlier, we recognize that there are many benefits of e-labeling, and it takes many years to implement e-labeling in a country. So I will start off this panel discussion with a question to Monica. From patients' perspective, how important is global collaboration in shaping regulatory system, particularly through implementation of digital solution?
I think that global collaboration on any topic when it comes to the patient community and things that make life easier for patient communities just goes without saying. That we continue to have discussions debating whether global collaboration is a good idea or consistency across the globe is a good idea. That frustrates the patient community because it's something that is important to us as global citizens, which particularly the rare disease community are certainly global citizens, and ensuring that there is consistency which allows better understanding, better conversation with health professionals in different countries when that becomes important, and the way that medicines come into our country as well and become available. I think the more consistent that can be across borders, that can only benefit the patient community.
Thank you, Monica. We hear you, how important it is to get patients' information, product information across the patient and the speed of it. So my next question, I would like to ask Carla, from a global company perspective, could you share best practices and experience in implementing e-labeling?
Absolutely. I think Ria really established, the foundation of why we need global harmonization. As a company, we want to get access to medications out to patients, and we want them to have the most up-to-date information. And so it's really critical that we have as much regulatory harmonization as possible and as much clarity on the preferred digital technology. I think some of the best practices that we've put into place also appreciate that we have to implement this in stages. We understand that for some, they may not have access to certain technologies. Not everyone has a smartphone, access to broadband or Wi-Fi. We understand that maybe in rural communities and small pharmacies, there could be real concerns. So some of our best practices include staged implementation so that there are systems for people to access paper and that there are call centers and other backup mechanisms in place, even as you're making the transition. We also think it's really helpful to start with potentially products that are used in hospitals where you would have greater access. Then we can move to information for healthcare providers and prescribers, and then transition to patients. So we think that having a staged approach will allow, different markets where they have different, sensitivities, based on, their configuration and things like that, to still move forward in this direction. We also think it's really important that when regulators think about e-labeling, that they think about things like sustainability. So obviously it's much better to not have all of that paper, but it's also an opportunity to include country-specific, market-specific information about disposal of products and things like that. So we really want everyone to think holistically about all of the information that's relevant to a prescriber, to a caregiver, to a patient. And those are just a few of the best practices. I think Rie really captured a lot of them.
Thank you, Carla. I hear you. Implement in phases, slowly but surely. So my next question is to Tony. From TGA's perspective, regulators' perspective, could you share, and your experience, could you share the key factors and challenges that have slowed down the rapid implementation of digital solution like e-labeling?
Sure. Look, it is a long journey. I've been involved in IPRP activities for quite a long time, with the Asia Pacific, and I've done similar mapping where we've sort of the challenge at the moment is still to get electronic versions of product information available to patients. In a lot of countries, it's not even available in. That's a great starting point, I think. And it just shows sort of trying to bring everyone along on the same journey has been the real challenge. And I love what Carla's saying about staged and doing it in stages. And I think that'll be a theme today about a lot of these big initiatives, is it's really hard to roll them out very, very rapidly, and you better to target the groups that need it first and where they'd benefit the most. In terms of, I guess, the next stage and actually making the data more accessible, I think that's an industry discussion that's sort of occurring at the moment, but I really haven't seen much traction amongst the regulators trying to, in terms of who's going to house all that information. I know a lot of companies already have that available, but in terms of a consolidated approach, I think we're a fair way off. But as a regulator, we can see the benefits, but I just don't think it's going to happen very quickly at this point.
Okay, thanks, Tony. So I can hear you. So we know the benefits, but it will still take time for countries to adopt e-labeling implementation. So my next question, actually, back to Carla. There are some key action best practices that you have shared on e-labeling implementation. Could you share with us example of how J&J is supporting the global adoption of e-labeling? Probably specific example from US and EU?
Absolutely. It's, as I think Tony said, it's a challenging space, and we recognize that, but we're very much committed, as are many other companies around this webinar, I'm sure. We have taken steps like working with IHI, the Innovative Health Initiative, to really foster public-private partnerships to further this. So again, understanding that it's a complicated space, that there are a lot of different considerations. We think having really close engagement where we can understand from the regulators, we can understand from patients, and then we can bring the private industry perspective and come together to work on solutions is really important. We've been participants in pilots in multiple markets, India, Singapore, Thailand, South Korea, Japan, and we bring those learnings forward. So that's another, I think, really important opportunity. When we have the chance to do a pilot, to explore what works and what's feasible, then we can bring those best practices forward. So we need to continue to do that and share that information. I think Rie really touched on how e-labeling fosters just greater access to digitalization and really leveraging all of the different things if we have interoperability, connection to FHIR, things like that. So we also support efforts like Accumulus, where we can really think about how we're using the data, regulatory collaboration, and also security issues that can go along with the digitalization. And then finally, I'll mention, there are projects like, Pharma Ledger, Gravitate Health, working with groups like FPA, APAC Med, that's also really important. Doing partnerships with our trade associations where we can come together, we can strategize, and we can not just support sort of e-labeling in isolation, but just greater access to data, greater interoperability and connectivity, all of the things that sort of create a better space for patients and greater access to information.
Thanks, Carla, for highlighting data access as well. My next question will go to Monica. Monica mentioned about patient access to medication, and Carla mentioned about access to data. I'd like to understand what are patients' expectations regarding how they are informed about their treatment, and how could digital solution enhance the access to medicine, and probably what are the challenges that may arise in their adoption.
Thank you. So I think on a one-on-one scale, patients want the information that is relevant to them. They want to be able to find quickly how the medication is to be used by them, what they can expect by taking it for them. So I think that digitization is just a very clearly something that would be of benefit in that space. It makes information and answers to questions that the patient community have very accessible. So I think on a one-on-one basis, I think that's hugely important. I think on a higher level, I think one of the things that the patient community brings to a discussion about labeling is an understanding of what would make a difference to a patient community. What are the key things that a patient community wants to know about a particular medication? And what does it want to know first? And when we're having these kind of discussions, I think co-designing with patient communities is super important, because they are the best risk management strategy that regulators, that developers, that manufacturers can have, because it is the patient community that is thinking about what are the consequences of me taking this medication? What are the consequences of me getting this wrong? What are the consequences of me providing this to my child without reading all the accurate information, without having the most up-to-date information? And one of the things about the rare disease community is it's a very active community with one another. One of the things that is so important to our community is connecting with other people in the community. Rare disease can be a very isolating experience. So people in Australia are talking to people across the globe. They're talking to other people. They're finding their community, their tribe across the world. So they are already talking about medications. They're already talking about access to medications with people in different countries. If there was one source of absolute truth that was available to everybody, then I think we would see a better, stronger patient community, and also the ability of the patient community to interact in the co-designing of what that communication looks like, how that communication is best needed by different types of people, different types of communication abilities, different kind of health literacy across the community. And digitalization makes that possible. So it's exciting. It may not be such an exciting topic, but it's really exciting to us about the possibilities in a different lived experience.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Monica. I can hear you. What patients need easy access to information and single source of the truth, the right information, the right time, and easily accessible. But my last question probably is to Tony. You briefly mentioned, yes, we want easy access to information, but is there any what are the challenges to ensure data security? Probably you can highlight to us on what are the strategies and measures to overcome the challenges and accelerate the adoption. So we need to build trust as well. Yeah, just to wrap up this session. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have some of that information on the technical side, but in terms of adoption within Australia, it has been slow. There has been some very conservative views out there and accepting it. So we're definitely encouraging companies to move to include product information, in data matrix codes or QR codes. But the actual adoption and removing of the paper versions has been quite resistant in Australia. I hope that can move ahead, that there's definitely sufficient lobbying from industry going on, to move in that direction. But I think the question today is more about that accessibility, and I haven't seen a big push. As a regulator, we wait for that push from industry. We've always got too much to do, and really industry needs to decide what those priorities are and comes to us. I haven't seen a lot of instances where that accessibility is a regulator issue. I think we're all very supportive. Definitely the up-to-date information is a really big driver. I think some of the vaccines, where they are updating their product information, every few weeks is just a great example of that. That's just pointless. You can't have repackaging. You can't have, it's always going to be out of date, that information. So definitely as regulators, we are very supportive. But yeah, sometimes there are just confounding issues, and hospitals and all these different. There's so many different players in this space that you have to convince, and sometimes when the right time is, that regulator just jumps on board and makes the changes needed to support it. But I guess that's why we say it's a long process, and the slow rollout, choosing where the best game is, as Carla and Monica both pointed out, is the way to approach it.
Thank you, Tony. All right, thank you everyone for your valuable insights. Before we wrap up this panel session, probably we can share the key takeaways and insight from this session. Thank you. So here are the key takeaways from today's sharing. The first session, the first point that we noted is dynamic progress of e-labeling initiatives, such as issuance of e-labeling guidance in Asia region has been made in the last few years, and the implementation of FHIR e-labeling should be advocated as a common international standards across Asia. And the availability of patient-centric labeling is only 30% of the markets in Asia region, and the importance of introducing patient-centric e-labeling should be encouraged. And that sums up my 3 key takeaways for today's session. I will hand over the next session to Tam for universal labeling, how e-labeling can complement universal labeling implementation. Over to you, Tam.
Thank you, Wan Lee. Thank you for moderating a fantastic session on e-labeling. It's somewhat a natural progression, I suppose. As we do have some more challenges with e-labeling, we have aspirations to move to universal labeling. And so this next session is talking about universal labeling. Just before we do commence, we will put up a little poll question for you to answer, and then I'll introduce the next speaker. Thank you. So the same format as the last session, we'll have a keynote speaker, and then we'll invite some panelists to take some questions. And then at the end of this universal labeling session, we will open up to Q&A to the audience. So it's my pleasure to introduce Helen Critchley. She's the country regulatory lead for Sanofi for the Australia New Zealand region. I have the great pleasure to work with Helen as we both co-chair the Regulatory Affairs Working Group for Medicines Australia. Helen has over 35 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry, initially in global research and development, working in the formulation development and manufacturing, and then subsequently regulatory affairs. In addition to the co-chairing of RORG, the Regulatory Affairs Working Group, she's a member of the 5 Trade Association group for the access countries that published the results of the industry survey earlier this week. Over to you, Helen.
Thanks so much, Tam. Well, I think we've heard already that change can take time, but digital is moving fast. So I'm going to take you on a fast forward journey, and let's imagine we're in the future in this amazing ecosystem where everything's connected. We've got all our API. A drone arrives, drops off my medicine. I've got my EPI. I might have an avatar to help me out. And I might have a medicines bot who can actually look at my personal e-health record and create my personal drug interaction survey just for me. So Monica, I hope that would be your dream. So if we go to the next slide, please. What will get delivered to me today is still a medicine that will have lots potentially of words on it, and I will need to have a unique pack for each country potentially. So let's look first at the concept of universal labeling in the context of a global pack where only critical information, the key thing is to identify, authenticate, and ensure integrity by knowing the trade name, the strength, the formulation or the dosage form, the how to store the product, and if it's got a data matrix code, potentially it's been serialized. In addition to that, having a global standard iconography, because today it's not words that help patients understand things, it's much more about the pictures. We all use emojis, and that's the way we're going. But today we're still using a lot of words. In this concept of a universal label, then if I'm a patient going to different regions of the world, the familiarity of this universal label will be much more likely for me to quickly recognize what my medicine is. There will be no country-specific information directly on the pack. I will get that country-specific information from those digital codes, whether it's QR, data matrix, or future technology that we don't even know about yet, but could arrive very quickly. And also, we've heard before, that up-to-date EPI information is already going to be available because we've already moved to that future state. Next slide. So if I look at an example today of where country-specific information is already in a paper format in a single place on a box, you can look at the EU blue box. So if you're not familiar with the way the EU works, if you get a new medicine approved by the centralized procedure, all the packs have common information on them, verbatim translations if it's beyond English. But if you have any country-specific information, is on a specific place in the pack with the country-specific information as sort of illustrated there. So imagine the similar concept where all information that was country-specific, all different language levels, are available through a QR or a data matrix code. Next slide, please. So why do we need to think about the actual packaging, the cartons and the labels on the product, as opposed to what we're talking about before, which is mainly the leaflet? In COVID, not only were the leaflets accessed by a QR code, but it wasn't actually possible to do all the unique country-specific labels, nor is it possible on very small vaccine vials to get an awful lot of information. So universal labels were actually also critical to manage supply. So recognizing that potentially we may face another pandemic situation, thinking now how we can be ready for that base is a good place to start. When you simplify the supply chain and you reduce all the downtime in manufacturing, in countries, if countries can all take a common pack, it's actually much quicker to resolve medicine shortages. And once product is created, have that accessible to all countries rather than need to wait for country-specific information. And in all of these things, the less unique things, the less unique components that are created and potentially need changeover. And I will say that typically the packaging components I'm talking about are changed far less frequently than the leaflets. We just heard for COVID, many different safety updates very quickly. But sometimes labels do change. You might change the storage, or you might have a new look and feel of the label. So if we can do that on a global basis and reduce the wastage of all these country-specific things, then we're also making an important contribution to the environment and sustainability. So next slide, please. So how can this concept of universal labelling benefit patients? We've already talked about this digital ecosystem. And medicines labelling today is very much driven by regulations that were created in the paper era, which I think is also one of the reasons why we're seeing such a slow progress to going from what has always been something that's been thought about in paper to having the trust and the confidence that you can access and use information appropriately in the digital world. But we're heading into the future. So in the future, we need to be fit for future and be digital. Not only that, is iconography is much easier to help communicate key messages. So I have in words, do not use in pregnancy, versus if I have a little icon of a pregnant woman with a red cross through it, that's visually means if I have poor health literacy, I am able to hopefully see that message and at least ask or receive training on what that means. So it is very important to create this standardized iconography if we move to universal labeling. And as we're seeing, this is building on the existing EPI where people become clear about how you access formats. So in the universal labeling era, accessing information via digital means will be already a very common thing. And sometimes, I think, Monica, you talked about access for small communities. In the bigger picture of things, supply chains can have constraints when you need to make very small volumes for countries. And where there can't be an accommodation for countries to accept non-unique product, it could sometimes be a barrier that it's actually almost unviable to make the quantities that are so small for an individual country and take all that downtime. So getting to that universal state sort of helps to get that multi-country use of packaging, and really not only does that, but because packs will be much more uniform, identifying what a patient is taking will be much easier. So it simplifies that global monitoring and surveillance, and certainly links with a concept of the identification of medicinal products, IGMP. So we all know that when we're talking about a product, we're talking about the same thing. Next slide, please. So putting into that context those thoughts about the, what, why, and how of universal labelling, if we think about the opportunities and challenges, as we've said, technology is moving at a fast and furious pace. We look at other sectors, banking, home appliances, some of the home appliances in your that we're using, where we access all the instructions online, have some significant safety risks. Different to a medicines benefit risk, but we are willing to access those types of information digitally. And so looking at that sort of rapid acceleration of this digital world we're going to be living in. And as medicines become more complex, really focusing on health literacy is critical. So with the EPI and with iconography, we believe that that's going to just open up an optimal way of helping patients get the information they need when they need it that's right for them. And in Australia, we sort of call that quality use of medicines. As I said already, most regulations were reflective of a pre-digital era. And if we look at ICH has harmonised everything to do with quality, safety and efficacy, and yet the outcome of an evaluation is actually the prescribing and consumer information. We've never addressed what should be the uniform requirements on the carton or the label on the product to identify and maintain the integrity of the product. And should that be something that we should really start to say, if we harmonized that, we simplified the supply chain, we made a uniform way of communicating to patients everywhere in the world, that information. The information doesn't have to be the same in each country, different temperature zones, etc. But the way it's presented, the place it's presented, so no matter where I am in what country, I know where to find the storage information. I know what the name of my drug is. I know what the strength is. That for us is the sort of critical information, and everything else is much better communicated, not in words, but with my EPI or my avatar or my medicines bot and all those things that we can connect together in that digital ecosystem. So if we also think in the real world, when in prescription medicine land, quite often the patient is either getting a label from their pharmacy on the pack, which is their main source of information. So little use in putting unnecessary words on the label. And if you're in a hospital, often you don't see the pack at all. So whilst we've heard that medicines legislation to achieve harmonisation is a very long, staged and time-consuming and complex, it really does bring the benefits to enable better use of resources to drive innovation. So if we want globalisation and harmonisation, it's a key focus for us in industry and regulators. And I think we've also heard it's a key priority for the patient community. Is it time that we should ask ourselves the question, what's the purpose and role of the printed information in this rapidly evolving ecosystem? And should we think about evolving beyond the EPI to optimise patient care? So there's some thoughts, and let's hand it over to the panel.
Thank you so much, Helen. That's a fantastic presentation. If I could invite the panelists for this session to turn their cameras on. The second panel we have is Pascal Alanat from Pfizer, Monica Ferry we're inviting back, as well as Tony Manderson. Pascal, would you like to just introduce yourself and just give a bit of background, since we've done that for Monica and Tony in the previous session already?
Yeah, absolutely. So can you hear me well? Okay, so good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So Pascal Olani, I'm working for Pfizer in the global supply chain in a group that we call the Serialization and Traceability Center of Excellence. So my role is to monitor the different regulations and to be sure that Pfizer is compliant with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. So I've just got a question or two for each of the panelists. I'll just start with Monica, if I could. Monica, in the last session, you gave us an understanding of how e-labeling is useful for patients. Now, if we take that step further in universal labeling, what can you see as the advantages for on-the-ground patients taking their medication?
Well, I think one of the things that strikes me from Helen's presentation is the efficiency that we're talking about can be gained. So anything that brings efficiency in a system which is going to make medications accessible is incredibly welcome to the patient community. So anything that saves costs because it's more efficient, that money can then be redirected into other areas. From our perspective, the boxes and the what's on them, as long as it's 100% accurate, 100% clear, and we trust the regulators and we trust the process that does that, then that's what we need. But I'd like to support Helen's conversation around iconology. I mean, we are so used to that, particularly in the patient community, where we have different languages, we have different health literacies. We are used to that in different ways than on packaging. We think about that in terms of how to get to places. We think about that in terms of how communication is made available, how to get to the right bathroom. Like every day we're already using it. So it would just seem to be such a sensible step and way forward.
Thank you, Monica. Can I ask you another question while I've got you? Where in the last session, you talked about co-design of digital labeling. In your experience, have you worked or seen that actually happening with co-designing of patient groups, either in the printed versions now and, whether that's possible and that you can see that's an opportunity for future for universal as well as digital e-labeling?
That is a super interesting question, because I have been sitting thinking about how do I make this happen, because the patient community is involved in co-designing everything from the type of communication we would like to happen in an appointment with a health specialist, through to how we would like researchers to engage with us and us engage with them, to cultural groups. So we ensure cultural group information is fed into all of those aspects. So as we've been talking, I've been thinking about this is another area that if we could get this right, we could significantly improve, and this may sound silly, but we could significantly improve quality of life for people with rare disease, which is my area of expertise. And the line I draw there is that the community will tell you that having a rare disease is having a full-time job. If you just managing your disease or your child's disease is a full-time job. So anything that removes stress, mental health stress, anything that removes time from things that you need to do is saving you time and giving it back to you. So, and for our community, that's a hugely significant improvement. So I'm thinking, well, no, we're not yet involved. However, I might just be coming after some people that are in these meetings, because I can really see value.
Great, thank you. There are, in Australia, people might not be aware that the government's just completed a review of the health technology assessment process, and parallel to that, there's been some consumer engagement work to see how consumers can get involved in the regulatory part of the process as well as the reimbursement part of the process. And I will have to go away now and have a look to see where the packaging stuff might fit in with the co-design work. And maybe, Monica, we can have a chat after this conference. So thank you for your response. I'd like to ask Pascal now, as a manufacturer of medicines in Pfizer. Pascal, from a manufacturing logistics supply chain perspective, what do you see as the potential benefits of universal labeling? And give us a real understanding of how things work on the ground when you're packaging and producing these medicines for patients.
Yeah, absolutely, Tam. Thank you very much for the question. So I guess for me, I see three main areas of benefits for the manufacturers. And I think Helen touched base a little bit on that already. But the first one will be really about the artwork management. So when we start to prepare, the carton, so the design of the carton. So obviously managing one artwork per country is very time consuming for everyone. So for the manufacturers, but also for the authorities when approval and review are needed. So moving to one universal artwork and carton for many countries per region or even inter-region will obviously save time here. But for me, the main benefits will be when we move to the packaging line, when we run the batch at the packaging line. So because we will be able to run fewer batches, but bigger batches. So, today when we have to manage artwork or package and labeling per countries, we need to run a batch per countries, basically. It's more or less like that. And for some countries, as you can imagine, the volume can be very low. So we run very small batches of maybe 100 or 200 of carton, which will go with a lot of physical loss of packaging material, because each time you run a new batch, you need to set up your packaging line. So you need to do some verification. And with all this setup and verification, you will physical loss of packaging material. And that will take a lot of time as well. So imagine if we have a universal labels that we can use in many, many different countries, we will be able to run big batches with only one time of setup and one time of all this verification and control. So we will really reduce the number of physical loss. So that's the big advantage for the manufacturers. And then we have, if we move to the supply chain, so when we have run these batches, obviously we will have a lot of saving as well in the supply chain, so in the transportation. So because today we need to adapt the size of the carton, so we need to adapt the transportation, so the truck, the physical truck from one location to another, also per countries, because we have dedicated batch and dedicated carton with universal labeling again. So if we can have only one big batch that we can run on our packaging line, we can have one size of carton, which will also be able to optimize the shipper case, optimize the pallet, so optimize the transportation, and we can have this big quantity available for many, many different countries. We can also optimize the storage and the transportation. So if you look on all the supply chain, you know, from end to end, we will have saving at each step, which is what we envisage.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, the efficiencies that you can save as a manufacturer can only benefit patients. And, you know, in Australia, and I'm sure in other countries, medicine shortages are an issue. So, you know, if we have a shortage for whatever reason from one company, you know, we can see what other sponsors have similar medicines. We can access those and, you know, be able to move around the medicines around the world and, you know, for them to come, for example, to Australia quicker, just for those efficiencies. So, Pascal, can I keep you a bit longer and ask, with a single barcode, can you do many things with a single barcode if we do move to a universal labeling approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a very important question as well, and a very important topic, because I mean, with the universal labeling, we have seen with the previous topic about the how to access product information in an electronic way. And today, the issue, so the challenge we have, so to access this information in an easy way for the patient or for the healthcare provider, we are using QR code. Because it's very easy for someone to take the mobile phone, to point the cameras and to access the information. But we need also to understand that from a supply chain point of view, we have already a barcode applied to our pack, because we need this information, this barcode, to run the supply chain processes. So our goal is not to add multiple barcodes on the same pack, because that will create a lot of confusion for everyone. So if we can achieve with the unique barcode and the barcode we are using for the supply chain today, because it's already widely used, widely integrated in all the processes, so which is the GS1 data matrix, we can also access all the electronic product information we need, or the patient needs, with this barcode as well. So the goal is really to use one barcode and develop the technology, and we have the technology today. It's just a question of use the technology to access the product information, the leaflet, everything from the mobile phone, so the patient can do that. The challenge we have today, which we are working on, is to do that today, you need to have a dedicated application installed in your mobile phone, which is sometimes not easy for the patient, because he has to think, okay, I need to launch this application to access the information for my medicines. So that's why we are working with Google, we are working with Apple to develop as well what is needed from a technology point of view. So the patient can use the mobile phone, the camera, like a QR code, flash the barcode, so the data matrix we use for the supply chain, and access the information. So from a patient experience point of view, that will be very easy. And that's what we want to achieve. So we are working on that, and we really we are really confident that we can achieve that in the next couple of months or years.
That sounds very exciting. Thank you. And, you know, I can imagine once that technology becomes available, you will have a transition period, you know, so you wouldn't leave patients behind if they can't access that app and that kind of thing. So there'll be definitely risk mitigation processes involved. Thank you. Tony, I'd like to come to you now, please, and ask from a regulator's perspective, what are the opportunities and the challenges that would need to be addressed to remove any barriers to progressing to universal labelling?
Yeah, no pressure at all. I think they've been great conversations. I think everyone can see the benefits. I think it's, you know, I think it's an incredible vision, and you know, especially as I said, that, you know, a large driver at the moment is those medicine shortages. You know, huge benefits there. I know they're doing consultations at the moment for medicine shortages in Australia and how to manage those. Look, for me, I am responsible for the labelling orders in Australia. I have been in this world for a while now. It's so complex. And I think the conversation has to start with that quality use of medicines. At the moment, it's so complex. They try to rely on the label for so many aspects on the quality use of medicine. And you have to detach that. You have to pull that apart and really understand what it is you need. I mean, maybe you can start product specific vaccines. You know, we've been there. We understand. You definitely can start with those goods that are supplied directly to hospitals and don't have patients never see the packaging. You know, that's where you can get that very simple label for biologicals, for example, for those cell therapies. Of course, they don't have, you know, an OzStar number and so forth because they just supplied to hospitals. There's no need for that patient verification that it's, you know, validity or so forth. So, you know, but products range so greatly. Medicines, the range of safety issues range so much. I mean, I think we're publishing an update to the labelling order on Monday, and you know, in that there's only one change, and we've spent over a year, you know, sorting that change. That's around electrolyte bags and how the units should be expressed. It's taken us a year to progress that and exactly how they should be defined on a label. And we're currently going through, you know, the review of the labelling orders. I think we have 280 odd issues that we could address in the next update to the labelling orders. And we're saying that our labelling orders are fine, but these are just things that could make the labelling orders better. So you can see the problem. The problem is that at the moment, everyone wants a piece of that label to address the quality use of medicines. And I think if you can strip it back to what's needed on the label and then what's needed in the hospital systems versus pharmacies versus and all those other touch points in the supply, then I think you can have a really easy conversation with the regulator around, see, you really only need minimal information on that label. I think that's enough for now. I can get into GS1 and so forth as well, but I definitely encourage that data matrix code use as well. We've been there and developed that standard a few years ago, back in 2020, and now seeing 2D barcodes, QR codes, and data matrix codes is going to cause problem. You're going to scan the wrong code. Everyone knows that there's an issue here that needs to come back together. The software, again, I think interoperativity of systems is an enormous issue. The hospitals and the state-run hospitals are so slow. So how can you say you're going to do this one thing? You just can't do it in isolation. It's great to hear, Pascal, that you're talking to, you know, around the software providers, because that's the key again. You have to address the quality use of medicines in all these other ways before the regulator will go, okay, well, that's easy. Yeah, small steps.
Yeah, some important key points, Tony, that the starting point should always be the quality use of medicines, you know, up front, and then go from there. And I think picking up from the last session, it's the staged approach, possibly starting, like you said, in hospitals. The supply of medicines that are only used by healthcare professionals might be a better starting point, just to reduce the risk to start off with. Sounds like good practical ways. just another question, and I could open it up to Helen even and others in the panel about ICH. And I wonder if it's a chicken and an egg thing where, ICH is international harmonization with, for example, universal labeling. Would you start the conversation in parallel with the ICH groups in terms of universal labeling, where you might start, or do you start within your country specific in a hospital trialing some of that first, or do you do that in parallel, or what kind of approach if you want to progress this topic? I'll start with Tony, and then I can throw to Helen and Pascal if you like.
Yeah. So look, I think this is a great idea. I think starting with ICH is a really good starting point. I think the end point of an ICH would be they may highlight minimal requirements, but again, you're going to talk about minimal requirements because each class of medicines has different requirements which ensure their quality, their safe use. So I think ICH would just be a starting point. It would be great to say, oh, this is what could be the minimal information on a label, but you're still going to have, for each different class of goods, you're still going to have specific issues and how to resolve those. So I think ICH is a good start, but I'll leave it there.
Helen, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's like everything. I think they were highlighting these are long conversations that need to start. And I think the beauty of ICH is, I think to your point, Tony, from the manufacturing side, and Pascal, I'm sure you'll add on, what is the minimum that can be universal? Because, if we can get the minimum right for everyone, that in itself is a one-step simplification in terms of error. Like if most of it is the same and then maybe there's still a bit of unique till you can go fully digital, that in itself is actually reducing your risk of errors, and risk of errors causes recalls and other things. So yeah, but I think the most important thing is start the conversation. Starting things globally with the speed with which you are globalizing, for me, makes far more sense than starting at a country level.
Thanks, Helen. Pascal, do you have any comments?
No, I mean, I can just concur what has been said. So I think starting from global and having, for us manufacturers, global guidance on what we can do and what we can't do, so will really help. And I guess as many topics, the most important thing is having the stakeholders talking to each other. And I think ICH and such a global organization can really help to get all the stakeholders on the same table, so we can have the same conversation and drive forward. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Monica, do you want the last word before we open up to the audience Q&A?
Oh, that's a big ask after such a great discussion. But I would have to say that I think I feel really hopeful on the basis of the presentations that we've had and the conversation that we've had, and just want to do another shout out for the rare disease community with multiple medications, most people because of comorbidities, and multiple medications for one condition as well. So any step forward, and everything starts with that. I 100% agree. Everything starts with getting the stakeholders all in the room and having a discussion, but starting with what's the result that we want, and how do we go about getting it? I really get frustrated by conversations that begin with, we've got all these barriers, how do we get through them? I think we have to start from the other end. What do we want here? What's the outcome that serves everybody? What do we need to do to get it? And then work our way backwards through what's stopping us.
Great, wise words. Thank you, Monica. Thanks, Helen and the panelists. Great conversations. Wanli, let's start the Q&A with the audience, and I'll throw to you to maybe kick that off, just so
Yes, thanks,
break.
Tam. So I see 3 questions. I will start with the first question. Is on health literacy. It's on the PI. Probably this question is to Rie. Since patient will have easier access to PI through e-labeling, how do you ensure that they will clearly understand the information and avoid misunderstanding that could cause panic?
Thank you. It's a really important question. So the content-wise, we should create the patient-centric product information, which should be written in patient-friendly language. So even though we provide the potential adverse reactions, to the patient, even though we inform the patient of the potential adverse reaction, for example, like a Stevens-Johnson syndrome, but if that patient do not understand what the Stevens-Johnson syndrome is, then it's not helpful. So we needed to create patient-centric product information, which should be written in patient-friendly language. On the other hand, we have realized that it has been increased that the patient try to search the product information on the internet or SNS. The patient may come across the wrong information or fake information. So it is really important for us to provide most up-to-date and trusted information to patients. And then furthermore, the technology is evolving every day. So when we create the structured content e-labeling based on HS7 file, that can be linked to the electric health record. So then if the patient has the lactose intolerance, then the product information, if the product has the lactose, that information can be highlighted and then much easy for patients to understand. They have to be careful. So I think there are still a lot of things to do to evolve and provide the product information to patients in a friendly way.
Thanks, Rie. What I understand is that we will need to educate the patient, definitely, to understand the medical terminologies. And at the same time, we need to make sure the product information is written in an easy to understand language for patients, for both HCPs, healthcare professionals, and for patients. Probably it will be a different version for patients, which is in a layman term. Okay, the second question I see is a very important question on language, on universal labeling. Probably this is for Helen. Are language differences considered in universal labeling? Product name, strength, dosage form, and storage conditions are most essential for patients identify for products and to ensure proper storage. Not everyone could read and understand English. How do we ensure a product in universal labeling could be accepted in countries such as Asia, China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely, language is considered. So remember, universal labeling is in that future world where everything is digital. So patients are already accessing their EPI, hopefully using the single data matrix code. The next step is, yes, they might see English, but everything that they would see for Russia, China, any other country in the world will be on the data matrix. So it will tell me in Russian, Chinese, Arabic, all of the information that I would need for my country, as well as give me the EPI, etc. So this is the next step on from everyone getting used to a digital ecosystem. In addition, as we heard, starting off universal labeling in areas such as hospitals where the patient doesn't see the label is how you start to introduce the staged approach, etc. So it's not coming as a out of the blue. We're already saying you are in a digital ecosystem and used to using codes to access information. And I think, again, going back to different, I might buy something from another country and it's all in foreign language, but I can get a code and I can go and find my English version. It's no different to me buying things from home or Amazon that delivers every day. And I think the other thing is, this is where, how do you think about these things? This is why we need to start that global conversation in a forum like ICH to think about, where are the barriers? How do we address them? And as Monica said, start with the end in mind and then work backwards to say, how can we make it happen? But clearly, whichever country you're in and whichever language you need is the language you want. And to be honest, in Australia, we're very multicultural. All our labels are in English, and there are many people in Australia who might struggle to read English. So we already have ways that you can get, translated versions. So it's not unique, I think, probably in any country that there are people in the country where the information on the medicines label is not the language that they can read or read or understand.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, so I guess that the important point is to implement in phases, like what Carla mentioned in our earlier session.
Absolutely.
And not implement all at one go. Yeah, to sensitize the environment on this new concept. And I see there's another question on universal labeling. This question is directed to Pascal and Helen on universal labeling concept. Can the code be linked to the correct country product information based on location? This is actually probably referring to EPI as well, the code on the carton. If so, can we address the situation when patient is traveling? Do you envision it would possible to link the correct country based on patient's profile in electronic health record?
Yeah, I can take this question maybe. So that's what we really the beauty of the technology, I will say, because exactly that's what we are working on and to be able to achieve. So either with the dedicated application, as I said, where in this application, so the patient can define his profile, so can define his preferred language, or if he wants to get the information, the product information based on the location he is today. So I think with the technology, we can very easily achieve that, meaning that if I'm traveling to Australia, for example, and I'm French, so because my profile in the application will say I'm French, I will be able to scan a pack in Australia and get all the information in French, because that's in my profile in the application. And when we will move out of the application and we will be able to scan the barcode with the camera phone directly, that's something as well from the setup of my mobile phone, because it's set up in French, I will be also able to access the information in French from this barcode. So the technology really allows that very easily. And that's the goal we have as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Pascal. Anything to add, Helen?
I think Pascal's done a great job answering that question.
All right. We have another question on universal labeling. How would you manage different approval timeline? All right, this is more on the operation. How would you manage different approval timeline for manufacturing changes across different health authority and different product versioning?
I mean, perhaps I'll give a comment and then hand it to Pascal. I mean, this is no different to what happens today. So whether it's a country-specific label or a universal label, what's in the bottle is not controlled by the label. It's controlled by the batch information and all the batch records that go with it to control that. But maybe I raise another thing we hope in the future, that if we've achieved that utopia of a global module 3 and all of the wonderful post-approval change alignment through ICHQ 12, this will be global changes, universal labeling. That would be our utopia, wouldn't it, Pascal?
No, absolutely, yeah. You cover that very well, because that's what we want to achieve, and that's what we already have in certain regions where we have, like in EU or in the COCA region, a common approval process, let's say. So if we can have that universally, that will really help to manage these timelines. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen and Pascal. We have one last question to Monica. what best practices can Genetic Support Network of Victoria recommend for implementing e-labeling solution in low and middle income countries, particularly to ensure accessibility, usability, and compliance with local regulatory standards? Very valid question.
I think the genetic, probably not the Genetic Support Network of Victoria, but the Asia Pacific Alliance of Rare Disease Organisations, which we have an office in Singapore and we have staff in Singapore. We've just had a conference in the Philippines with the rare disease community, policy makers, health professionals, industry, who all came together for we have an annual conference. And I think it's the same as any other region or any other country that we would take on. I think the importance of getting the relevant people in the room, beginning the conversation. And I also think it's really important to think about, we've actually got the content. We're talking about digitizing information here. If we don't have the content, that's one. So a new medication, how we might go about communicating that, what's important to the patient community to know, how do they want to know it, what's their preferred communication methods, all of those kinds of things. But I think where we do have information, we've had medications in the region or in low middle income countries across Asia already, then how do we take a step with those? And we could begin with one group of medications. We could begin with bringing policymakers from ASEAN countries together and saying, okay, we need to do something collaboratively here and collectively. We'd like to do it for all of Asia Pac, but that's a bigger task. Let's start with these 6 countries, for example. So, and I'm really happy to be engaged in any conversation about progressing that and how we do that.
Thanks, Monica. I guess, yeah, we have a very good discussion. Anything to add from anyone before we close? If not, then we will have the full question.
I think we have to close one, Lee. Sarah's, I can see her with a video on, and we might need to end this session and so they can start the new one. Is that right, Sarah?
I think we have a few minutes of buffer time for a tiny coffee break. The next session will start in 6 minutes.
All right, well, let's wrap up this session. Thank you so much, panelists and presenters. Thank you, Wanli, for moderating. I hope everybody found that very useful as I did. And good luck for the next session. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. I hope you can hear me okay. So thank you for joining the session on combination products in the ATMP space in particular. I'm going to start by setting the scene, and then we'll be having a panel session where we'll be asking our panelists some questions. I think also we have some questions for you guys on your computers to answer. And then we'll be having a sort of roundup at the end. So thank you for joining. Okay, so let's get going. So in terms of setting the scene, regulators and developers have faced the challenges of drug device combinations and how to integrate the assessment of medicinal and device aspects of these projects. Some regulators, like the US FDA, have evolved dedicated organizational teams, the Office of Combination Products, to guide these developments. Other regulators, such as us at the MHRA, have managed to manage by coordinating between medicines and devices assessment teams. However, other organizations have these regulatory competencies in different organizations. So complexity remains in the regulation of these products. We've still no internationally aligned definition or regulatory approach to these, as we'll hear in the session. So harmonization efforts for drugs and medicinal devices are underway, but combination products are not the focus for these efforts. Training and experience sharing for combination products remains very limited worldwide. So complexity is also increasing for the combination products themselves. Whilst most combination products today are relatively familiar, for example, self-injector treatment pens, a critical and growing share of these products include cell and gene therapies. As such, we've brought cell and gene therapy regulation into this session to illustrate these future needs. So what is true for cell and gene therapies and combination products is that both of these therapeutic categories are requiring new skills and capabilities among regulatory organizations and developers alike. So we'll certainly be touching on the need for advancement and alignment in guidance, but we'll also need to explore how we can build the right organizations in Asia and globally to apply and advance this regulatory science. One route I hope, which I hope the audience will consider, is whether we need a roadmap to take this agenda forward. So thank you for that. Those are the introductory comments that I'd like to make. I think you have a poll coming through now. Yes, there we go. So I'm sure you can all see that on your screen. So we'd like you to answer these, please. In your working capacity, regulator, developer, academic, other, have you worked on a regulatory procedure for a combined medical product? So yes or no. In your working capacity, have you worked on a regulatory procedure for a cell and gene therapy? Yes or no. So please do answer those. I think we will head now to the first presentation. This is by Kevin Klein, who works for Exxon Consultancy. And yeah, so he's going to be setting the scene as well, and deliver the outcome of his study. So take it away, Kevin.
Thank you for the kind introduction. So I will provide a brief update about the global developments on drug-device combination products in the next 10 minutes or so. So please be aware I'm focusing now first on the drug-device combination products. In the next speaker, we'll focus a bit more on the advanced therapies as well. So next slide, please. I will start with a brief update on the global developments with regard to the guidelines. So as a reference, the FDA, and it was just mentioned, has been working on combination products for quite a while now. They've established a dedicated office to regulate combination products as well, early in 2022. And throughout the years, there were many guidelines developed. But what we now see really recently is that as of 2021, there were many developments in the global regulatory space on combination products, in particular drug device combination products, with many updated regulations from Canada, but also the US, the FDA updating their guidelines, the EMA also in response to the MDR that was came into place early 2021. We see a lot of developments in Asia as well. And please be aware, this is an update of 2023, so there might be new updates already since then. But just to give you the brief overview of the huge pickup on developments in this area. On the next slide, please, I will briefly give you the overview of the terminologies, the scope. And what you can see here is actually very interesting, that there's currently not a dedicated terminology used in all global spaces when it comes to drug device combination products. Now, for example, in the EU, there is no dedicated terminology used to describe these products, whereas, for example, the FDA uses combination products as a terminology. Canada uses drug device combination products as a terminology. So there's a lot of differences there, but also with regard to the scope. So in Europe, these products are all considered combination products or drug device combination products when there's a drug and a device, the same for Canada. The FDA also considers a biologic being part of this as a combination product, so not necessarily including a device. We have Australia and Japan that are also referring to advanced therapies being part of the definition. And we will hear a bit more about Australia in the next by the next speaker. In Asia, but also in Brazil, we see another interesting aspect. So they're only the single entity drug device combination products. So the drug device combination products that are produced as an integral part are considered part of the definition of combination products, whereas the scope is a bit broader in Europe, for example. So a lot of differences, as you can see, which is actually very interesting, but makes it also very challenging, of course, for some of the developers. Next slide, please. So we also try to provide a brief overview of what are now the products that we see in this category. And what we did was a quick scan, basically, for the EMA approvals, but also FDA approvals for the last 10 years to see what proportion of the medicines that were approved. So in particular, these focus on drug device combination products, but the drug is the primary component. What part is considered a combination product or drug device combination product? So what we see in Europe by the EMA, that a quarter of the products approved in the last 10 years can be considered a drug device combination product. Now, the products that are not considered drug device combination products are mostly related to oral products, so the tablets, capsules, but also some products provided in vials. But a quarter is actually using a device for using the medicine, administrating the medicine. With the large part being on the syringes, so injectables, but also then the pens. We see a lot of developments in this area, pre-filled pens, auto-injectors. These are the more sophisticated drug device combination products where there is a lot of development, and we expect more to come in the next years. But also the inhalers. Of course, this is a famous group. Everyone knows these products. They've been around for many years as well. So these are kind of the larger groups. On the next slide, we've also looked at the FDA, about similar figures. Of course, FDA has approved a bit more products because in Europe, you can also approve outside the EMA through national procedures. But in essence, you see similarities. Again, the injectables with the syringes and pens are a large group, with inhalers as well, but also the eyedropper, which is interesting. FDA has adjusted their guidance on eyedroppers, now considering them also combination products, I think as of 2 years ago, which makes them also belong to this category. nasal sprays, of course, are also part of this category. So this is just to give an impression of how the field looks like, which is, as you see, quite complex. So a diverse field, very different types of products, unique differences, unique challenges, as it were. And on the next slide, I provide some examples. So we have the syringes, which we have been around for a long time, but you see that there are quite some complex syringes coming to markets as well, like dual syringes to administer the product, which are quite sophisticated in a way. So these require some complex studies also how to be used. And of course, companies face challenges when it comes to different regulatory approaches. The auto-injector is something that we now see coming to the market more frequently, and we believe there are more developments in this area as well in the future. Of course, the on-body injector is something even more advanced, so also interesting developments here. But you have a wide range of inhalers, but also implants, as I'm showing here. One other interesting example is an electronic dispenser for an ophthalmic spray. This is actually a device which uses software. We haven't seen these products a lot in the drug-device combination product space, but we will expect to see more drug-device combination products using software in the future. So this is an important area also where regulation and regulatory harmonization will be increasingly important in the years to come. Next slide, please. So we had a couple of discussions with companies developing drug-device combination products. Now, they expressed some general concerns that there are globally varying regulations, in particular submission requirements, which is quite challenging for developing these products. Now, this results in an increased interaction with regulatory authorities, which can result in duplication of work. And in essence, this also, of course, requires many more resources for developers, but also increases the uncertainty for developing these products. Now, the most challenges that we have identified are centered around the European Union, in particular because the regulation there is a bit fragmented, with the regulators such as EMA being not under one umbrella with the notified bodies who are assessing the device part. So the lack of communication can be challenging there. So that was perceived as one of the issues. China was mentioned also, but more in a way that the new regulations there, of course, brought a bit more uncertainty on how to comply with these regulations. There are some local registration requirements. But in general, it was perceived as something new, but companies learned to address the new challenges they faced. What was interesting is that some expressed more clarity needed in these transition periods towards new regulations, where there were some clarities, and this could be addressed in advance with more clarity on how to approach this. On the next slide, they also discussed some recommendations. Now, of course, to start with the need for more global harmonization, one of the parts is, of course, to adopt a common terminology at a global level, and to create a consistent classification scheme. So what's exactly a combination product? Of course, when you look at drug-device combination products, whether the device or the drug plays the primary role in the effectiveness, and which could be more challenging with future products, so-called borderline products, to have this also more aligned at the global level. And also, of course, unified standards and submission requirements to reduce the regional variations. It was also mentioned to stimulate regulatory reliance, work-sharing schemes, which can be helping to address the current gaps in that we face. Now, we see this already with South American countries that are relying heavily on FDA assessments. It was also mentioned that early engagement can play an important role, in particular with new type of combination products that are new to the market, to address any outstanding issues before going through the regulatory process. And To sum it up, I think timing is crucial because we see a lot of global developments currently. So addressing these challenges now is, I think, the right time to be there and make sure that all the guidelines that are being developed are harmonized in the end to help these developers bring these products to the market. And with that, I would like to conclude.
Thank you, Kevin, for your nice and straightforward presentation. So now we're going to move to Tony Gill, giving TGA, the Australian Regulatory Agency, the perspective from there. Thank you. Take it away, Tony.
Thank you, Louise. You can hear me?
All good. Yeah.
Good. Just checking on that. Nothing worse than not. So what I'll do is a regulatory perspective for combined ATMPs and device combination, but I'll look broadly at the combination products. But I'll start with, so could you go to the next slide, please? Is how we regulate advanced therapies, because that really makes a decision on how we do when we have combination products and the differences that might occur. So we regulate cell and gene therapies either under our biologicals or prescription medicines framework. So we have the three frameworks, those two plus medical devices. So biologicals we look at as being of human cell or tissue origin, and certainly in the advanced therapies like the CAR T cells is when there's ex vivo manipulation of cells, while obviously gene therapies are in vivo, and they're regulated through our medicines framework, through different parts of the Act. And depending on whether they go through the biologicals or medicines framework, different standards apply, there's different GMP requirements, and different areas of TGA are responsible for evaluation. Next slide, please. So just reinforcing the area of the frameworks, we have the two frameworks, we have the two different advanced types of advanced therapies. And that both of these type frameworks are sort of well established, but they have different risks. So for instance, the cellular therapies, what's the starting material, the infectious disease safety risk, especially if it's non-autologous, and the different GMP considerations. Next slide, please. So just a bit of background on our different class of biologicals, which class 1 to class 4, which has increasing risk. Class 1 are our lowest risk, and we can deem something to be a class 1 biological. And for instance, we have done that for fecal microbial transplants. Next, please. Class 2 biologicals is where there's minimal manipulation or manufacturing, and products are regulated this way are corneas, skin, heart valves, bones and tendons, amniotic membrane, for instance. So it's, again, it's all, they've got the same use of these cells as all products as from the donor. Next, please. Class 3s have medium risk. They need the adequate donor screening. And these are some of the cell therapies. So for instance, mesenchymal stem cells, chondrocytes, T cells which have not been genetically modified. Next. And class 4 biologicals are a high risk, need, like class 3, need efficacy data. And they regulate, what type of products which are regulated are the CAR T cells and pluripotent stem cells. Next. So those class 3 and 4 can be seen as advanced therapies. Next. So for the product evaluation, there are the same dossier requirements, whether the cell therapies are biologicals or whether gene therapies, the requirements for quality, non-clinical dossier, clinical dossier, risk management plans, and the requirement for GMP. But as I noted before, there are slightly different GMP requirements depending on whether it's a cell therapy or a gene therapy. Next. So different standards to apply and different areas lead the evaluation. Next. So we're going to combination products and probably looking at them overall. So the principal therapeutic effect for the product determines what type of therapeutic good the product is and how it's regulated, whether it's regulated as a medicine or a biological or a medical device in some ways. So it might also depend on other factors such as therapeutic claims and intended use. So commonly, medicine, medical device combinations where the medical device incorporates or are used to administer medicine, and that's pre-filled syringes, inhalers, they are said to be medicines. And in fact, we have a legislative instrument which declares that if the product is there and is a single sort of entity with the medicine in it for the delivery of the medicine, so the inhaler, the pre-filled syringe, the device element is not deemed to be a medical device, and so it's not evaluated through the medical device framework. However, what we do is liaise with the medical device area. It's about the function, certainly for the more complex, and certainly we've seen sort of electronic multi-dose pens, and which can have a complex, or obviously have a complex device component, delivery device, and they would be, we would get assessment of those by the people who also look at medical devices. Biological medical device, in other words, where biologicals, human cells, generally what we're talking about here, is a combination of medical device. That might be a matrix, a non-sort of human-derived matrix in human cells like chondrocytes. It might is certainly an example of a biological medical device. And also we're aware of trials, for instance, putting islet cells in a device, in a matrix, which would be a device, to be able to transplant those. Under our legislation, anything that has a biological in it is to be come in through the biological framework and assessed there. Or although we would still look at the medical device combination, look at the device element to that. Biological medicine combinations probably are unlike, we're not sort of aware of them in a single product, but they would be regulated as a biological, although we are aware of some, for instance, CAR T cells with universal connectors, where a medicine might be given, a ligand even once the CAR Ts have been delivered, to actually either top up the ligand that might have been on at the time of administration, or even potentially to have a completely different ligand to be able to attack a completely different target. Next. So for the regulation of these, the biological plus medical device is always the biological framework. And therefore the assessment of the medical device is not, because it's not a medical device as such, from the purposes of the legislation, that would be still assessed and looked at in line with the essential principles, but it doesn't have to, it's not assessed as if it was a standalone medical device. Again, with the medicine, where the medicine is with a medical device, the delivery system, the medicines framework, but certainly the complexity of the delivery system, be it a pen, the auto-injector, adrenaline auto-injector is a classic example, are still assessed by our engineers for the function that they do actually deliver the medicine in the dose that people talk about. The other type of combination product might be a medical device incorporating a medicine, where the medicine activity is ancillary to the medical device. This combination product would be a medical device. So an example of that is a drug-eluting stent or heparin-coated catheter, although they have a medicine and device, obviously the primary action of this is to be a stent or a catheter. And they are actually evaluated through the medical device framework, but the medicine will still be looked at for its quality and the requirement for GMP for the medicine. Next. So that we'll be room for questions later. That's trying to just show that with us, with advanced therapies in a combination product, it actually depends on how we regulate it. We do have the 3 frameworks, which are all slightly different and obviously have different requirements for GMP for biologicals and medicines, and the requirement for the MDSAP type process for a medical device if it's being regulated as a medical device. So that finishes what I've got, and I'll pass back to Louise.
Thank you very much, Tony, for your interesting presentation. So now I'm going to hand over to my co-moderator, Rama Setharaman, who works at Roche, IFPMA, who is going to sum up the talks and give a perspective.
Thank you, Lewis. Thanks, Kevin and Tony, for the insightful and very informative presentations. So what we have heard is from Kevin's presentation that, of course, it kind of talked about the various drug device and the combination products, the DDCPs, and also the trend of increasing approvals of DDCPs. But also we heard about the complexity in terms of the delivery systems that's coming up with all the implants, electronic dispensers, and even software-enabled medical device delivery systems are also, there is a lot under development these days. And also we heard about some of the challenges from the studies, including there's a lot of uncertainty, evolving regulations, varying regulations and aspects like that. So those are real challenges. And Tony did share with us on TGA's regulatory approach for ATMPs. We heard about 2 key concepts, which is very important for me. One is, of course, a risk-based approach, which is a very important concept, irrespective of what product categories we are talking about. And also the other one is on how do you regulate a combination which is based on the principal mode of action. So these were some important points we heard. But as we spoke about this, we also saw that Kevin's presentation did have some recommendations in terms of talking about how collaboration is very important in this space, and also how early engagement with regulators would also go a long way in making things more easier for the regulatory pathway perspective. So now, talking about complexities and challenges, I would like to move forward to our segment, most awaited segment, which is on the panel discussion. So I would like to move on to our distinguished team of panelists we have here today, and we are going to work to tap on their experience and expertise to see how we can unpack some of these specific challenges and complexities we have heard, and probably even hear to some more additional challenges, both from the regulator's perspective and also from the industry perspective. So today we have our panelists are Ms. Aidawati from Medical Device Authority Malaysia, Yusuke Nozaki from PMDA Japan. We have Tony Gill from TGA Australia, whom we heard earlier. We also have Chris Dai with us from Takeda China, and Kevin Clean from Exxon Consultancy. So without further ado, I would like to kick off this panel discussion with the first question to Ms. Aidawati. Ida, we are all very familiar that Malaysia, the Medical Device Authority, has implemented medical device regulations, and that's based on a conformity assessment procedure conducted by CABs. So what will be interesting here for us is to hear from you, what is your current process in terms of pre-market evaluation for drug device combination products in Malaysia, and also it will be helpful to hear some of your key challenges in this space. Over to you, Saida.
Thank you, Dr. Rama. Good evening from Malaysia. Thank you for having me here today to deliver our insight of our approach related to evaluation process for device drug combination product. For Malaysia situation, actually we have two agency oversee the either is a device drug combination product or drug device combination product, depending on the primary mode of action. Okay, for today's session, because MDA is custodian for registration of medical device, so I only can talk about how is the evaluation process for device drug combination product. Okay, so definitely with regards any class of medical device in Malaysia, as you know, class B, C, and D, except for class A, is required to undergo conformity assessment by our registered Malaysian CAB before be able to registered with Malaysia authority. So it's also including the combination product. So usually they have two stages process, okay? So including two stages for device drug combination, they're required to obtain endorsement letter from our counterpart agency, which is NPRA. We call it an endorsement letter. So after getting the endorsement letter, so they have to submit to a conformity assessment body to undergo all the process of conformity before submitting the registration process to the authority for us to oversee the next process for registration. Okay, so the endorsement letter is issued by the NPRA upon all the certification criteria related to the component of the drug. So after getting the issuance of the endorsement letter, so the company required to get the endorsement letter submitted to the conformity assessment body. So once the process is completed, so there will be submitting the registration through our online system, Medcast, for the next process for us to do the evaluation. So any kind of changes related to the device, they have to notify MDA. So if there are any changes related to drugs, they have to notify the NPRA. So what can I foresee in our process? The key challenges is actually because for the situation of Malaysia, there will be a dual agency. So meaning that this correspondent or communication, both agency need to be streamlined, because the turnaround time and then the processing process and so on, it will be depending of these two agencies. So because they are not be able to register the device drug with MDA if they are not obtaining endorsement letter, because that endorsement letter they're required to the next process for the conformity assessment with the CAB. So that is what that I can share on the oversight of a Malaysia process. Okay.
Thank you, Ida, for sharing that. I will now move over to Lewis to take us through the rest of the panel discussion. Thank you, Lewis. Over to you.
Thank you, Rama. Okay, so we're going to hear from Tony Gill again. So Tony, so from a TGA perspective, can you share some good registration practices for ATMPs and drug device combinations, in particular what's worked well for TGA?
Yeah, certainly I think having a pre-submission meeting prior to submission is very important. Sometimes that's needed to help clarify which regulatory framework a particular product will go down, noting that it can differ from different regulators around the world. So early meetings, when I mean pre-submission this way, so I don't mean 2 months before submission or whatever. We're happy to have it even earlier than that to really make sure that things are coming in the right framework and that they know what the requirements are for that framework. And then probably a pre-submission meeting closer to the time of submitting to understand. I think that practice has really made a big difference. When that occurs, it goes much more smoothly for sponsors to do it, rather than getting a shock when they put something in and we go, well, sorry, it's the wrong frame.
Yeah.
Start again, which is not appreciated.
By either side, no.
Yes.
So a follow-on question for you. So how, in your opinion, can we improve the current scattered regulatory environments? Just a straightforward question for you there.
Thank you for the simple question. I think it is a real challenge because we all have different, slightly different regulatory frameworks. We vary from people who have separate medicines and medical device compete organisations. I mean, we're all in one like FDA and MHRA, but no, obviously we've got EMA with this, which only does the medicines. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenging ones to the scattered regulatory. I know in some of these there probably isn't an exact solution because it requires legislative change and a whole lot of things. But otherwise, I think it's interacting. I mean, there are certainly quite a lot of fora underway, like, for instance, the International Committee of Medical Regulating Authorities, IFPMA, a number which involves quite a lot of different regulators who, in a lot of cases, also do the whole broad range. So I think those sorts of forum. We also work in what's called the Access Group, which is Health Canada, MHRA, Swissmedic, HSA in Singapore and ourselves around a lot of these, and have working groups around ATMPs, for instance, but also do shared evaluations of other, only in the medicine space rather than device space. So I think some of those ways, I think, is what would probably makes it easier, but there is no simple solution.
Yeah, and I guess that's what we're trying to move away from, if you like, for this, and try to sort of develop it further. It's interesting. I mean, at the MHRA, we do have a separate devices unit, but we do have crosstalk, and the sort of the very pure devices element of it will be looked at by the devices team. But we're in the same organisation, so we can, have the crosstalk there. So thank you, Tony. So now we're going to go to Yuzuki at PMDA. Hi, good morning. Well, morning for me. Not sure what you evening. Evening.
Yep.
So how does PDMA evaluate ATMPs and drug device combination products in Japan? And can you share some of your key experiences and learnings so far? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Yusuke Nozaki. Thank you for having me here. And I would like to start with the categories. So, and Kevin had done very good summarizing his presentation, but I would like to add something. So in Japan, there are 3 categories of medical products, and one is drug, other is medical device, and the other is regenerative medical products. And cell therapy and gene therapy are categorized as regenerative medical products. And DDCP combination products can be, for example, combination of cell and scaffold or cell and device. And whether the combination product is classified as regenerative medical products or medical device or drugs is determined by the MHLW, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, according to the function and the purpose of the products. So for our case, the example of approved combination products categorized as regenerative medical products in Japan is kind of like a autologous cell process products. And the device part of that is that for harvesting and transporting the tissue from the patient. And it is considered to be a secondary component. So the device part of the combination products classified as regenerative medical products, the MHA have to implement the appropriate purchasing controls to ensure its quality. And we, PMDA, review the appropriateness of its control, they control the quality of the device parts. So that's the kind of example of the DCP and our experiences.
Thank you very much, Yuzuki. And to have a follow-up question to you. So How can national regulatory authorities synergize to harmonise and streamline regulatory pathways for ATMPs and drug device combination products, in your view? I suppose more from a sort of drug device combination perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid it could be like an ordinary answer, but harmonizing is really broad. There's many things to do. So we need, it's a kind of small steps, but it seems that the terminology is one of the deep topic that we have to do. It seems the different regulatory authorities have the different technical terms of the definitions. So harmonizing those words, technical terms, seems to be an important first action for start the harmonization. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a huge challenge, isn't it? When we have different classification systems. Yeah, so it's a big piece. Yeah. Okay, so so now we're going to go to Chris Dai from Takeda in China. Good evening to you. And so from a global company perspective, could you share with us the key considerations when registering drug device products in China, and obviously specifically ATMPs, and what sort of additional challenges that you find in your area? Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. And thank you for this question. And I'd like to share the China practice for drug device combination products submission. Firstly, I think the definition and the classification for drug device combination product in China is quite different comparing to FDA and IFPMA. In China, drug device combination products are defined as medical products that are composed of drugs and medical devices and are produced as a single entity. So here I need to highlight the single entity because the drug device co-package product or the FU cross-reference products are not classified as combination products in China. So the definition of the DDCPs is quite narrow. A typical DDCP, like the medicated cardiovascular catheter or some drug elution stent or some bone repair material containing some combinant protein, and so on. So for such a product, CDE and CMDE joint review will be applicable. The CDE is the Center of Drug Evaluation Center, and the CMDE is the Medical Device Evaluation Center. So similar to Malaysia, we also have two agents. So if the drug plays the primary role in effectiveness, these combination products shall be submitted to CDE. If the device part plays the primary role in effectiveness, the combination products should be submitted to CMDE, and CDE take part in the joint review. However, it's generally inappropriate to simply apply the requirements for drugs or devices to the combination products, and its combination characteristics do require a unified coordination mechanism of drug and device review that covers overall considerations, including the pre-submission consultation, acceptance, communication, technical review, inspection, approval, and post-market supervision. So, however, so far there's no joint office or whole process joint mechanism from China Health Authority, like FDA OCP. So as I mentioned, there's still a lack of regulatory definition and specifications for the drug device combination products of non-single entity or not integrated physically. such as drug device co-packaged products or the cross-labeled combination products. In such cases, it's difficult to simply apply the registration pathway of drugs. For the co-packaged combination product, such as disposable drug delivery devices, the corresponding device needs to be submitted to CMDE and get approval as medical device at first. And the device approval information should be submitted when drug NDA to the CDE. And CDE would only approve the co-package with device approval. So for a cross-labeled combination product, the drug and the device should be submitted to CDE and CMDE separately. Besides the difference regarding the single entity, there's also some other different classification in China. For example, the PFS, the pre-filled syringe and the pre-filled auto-injector, Lex injector pen, are classified as drug packaging material, but not combination products. And they should be submitted to CDE only. I think that's the overall consideration for combination products in China. The real case of combination products for ATMPs is quite limited in China, frankly speaking. However, I believe all the types I just mentioned could be a case for ATMPs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? There's not actually that many combined ATMPs. I mean, they've been mainly the cells on a sheet, you know, cells on a membrane so far. So yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, it's always going to be somewhat of a challenge because you've got you know, the expertise in being able to assess the device part, and then you've got the expertise in medicines regulation. So it's sort of bringing those together, and particularly also for, you know, for the regulators to be able to review those sorts of products. So thank you very much. So what do you think could help to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think if the drug device combination product is a non-single entity, so I think for example the drug delivery tools or system without the drug, or some medical software, the CTX.
Yeah.
I think it's necessary to consider developing and registering the medical devices simultaneously with the drug development. During the period of the DDCP's development, as we realize the complexity of device registration in China, for device that we can purchase from the market, from a supplier, for example, and we should give priority to use the models that have been registered in China, or the supplier can support the registration in China to mitigate the project risk caused by the combination products. For the device,
thoughts.
Yeah, as well simplify all the process. For the devices specifically designed for the drug, or if there's any innovative devices, integrating the device registration strategy into the China registration plan as early as possible will be beneficial for the overall project timeline and the cost saving. I can give an example. For example, the CDX, the companion diagnostics, we need to do the bridging trials in China, and the bridging trials can utilize the leftover samples from the drug clinical trials. So if the CDX development involved to the projects in the CTA phase, and the clinical requirements of the CDX could be considered.
Thank you very much. I think that's great. And thank you, Chris, for your comments there. So we're going to move on now to Kevin. So hello again, Kevin. Can you share 2 key challenges or areas for improvement in this area? Sort of what first steps you think we could take in the space of drug device combinations for ATMPs? Let's start with that, I think, first.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's difficult to answer, I have to say. There's quite a lot of that question. But so coming back to the presentation I gave, I think one of the most important aspects that we've shown is that many developers of combination products face these varying submission requirements. I think that's one of the key challenges that was observed. So submission requirements with regard to detail, scope, but also labeling, even different human factor study requirements that were experienced. So there's a lot of variation there, which is one of the key, most important challenges that was mentioned. Now, the other one, and it was just mentioned here as well, is the lack of coordination in some regions with regard to the device and the drug aspect of the combination product. And I think that one is an important one. So what we see at the FDA, they've established a while ago already a dedicated office to assess these combination products under one roof. And it was experienced as quite, it's actually the best practice to have these regulatory assessments under one umbrella. And China is moving towards this as well. And I think there's some really positive experience with this as well, that when you have the drug and the device experience in one assessment, that really helps the regulatory assessments, but also decreases the uncertainty for developers on what to expect. And we don't see this currently in the EU, where it's still fragmented, where you have the notified bodies assessing the device part separately from the drug part, which is assessed by EMA, for example. And that's why the EU comes up as one of the main challenges still in this area. So I think I have to say also that some companies are aware and are realistic. There are always country by country differences. And I think we want harmonization at the global level, but at the same time, companies are realistic that there are certain countries expecting different things from companies, and that's fine to a certain level, of course. But of course, as far as you can go, you want the harmonization to decrease the uncertainty for developers. And I think this is with regard to advanced therapies even more so important, although the combined ATMPs are quite a small group. With future developments, this can expand to quite a broad product landscape. And I think there's much more uniqueness to these products. So that's why harmonization at the global level might even be more important for these products that are mostly also addressing small patient populations that are spread out globally. So that's why these products have to reach the global market anyway. So the harmonization there plays an even more important role.
So what do you think a harmonized roadmap might look like? Again, simple question.
Yeah, that's a very simple question. So I think the roadmap, it should start with facilitating collaboration among the developers that experience certain challenges, but also regulatory agencies to come to these coordinated guidelines and submission requirements in the end. But I think that global fora, as Tony mentioned, but also fora like these are very important to bring everyone together and to address these challenges and to come to agreements about a roadmap in the end. So I can't provide a roadmap right now, but I think we all together in this room, globally distributed, should come to the roadmap in the end by having these discussions.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Kevin. So we're going to go back to Adewati. I actually missed off a question there for Adewati, the Malaysian organization there, so I do apologize. So Malaysia's been very active in the region, especially in the area of regulatory cooperation and reliance among regulatory authorities. Can you share how you can work together and harmonize and streamline the regulatory pathway? So what's your experience in sort of your leadership in that area. So.
Okay. For frankly speaking, actually, when we're talking about using the international platform, leveraging the harmonization for Malaysia situation, we haven't go through into details for the device drug combination yet. So we are now more into the medical device harmonization. But what we are looking into for the past 2-3 years from what we have been experienced, although Malaysia is actually one thing that we are monitored, is the market is quite small for device drug combination. So with the small market in Malaysia, one thing that we foresee is the lack of competency and exposure among regulator. So the next future, we might need to have a concentration in terms of strategic partnership with, for example, that what we have for the approach of medical device with IFPMA, GHWP. So we might have to further extend our collaboration strategically to address the device drug combination. So we might require more exposure in terms of what is the standard global approach, how to go about it to enhance the competency, understanding. So, and we do also understood that now the terminology also quite challenging. So we need to understand across the region, there will be a different approach, different terminology. So then what I can say, everything is still in the early phases. So we might moving into getting more training, getting more exposure for our regulator. So we might require to come out with the combination product pathway in terms of addressing the standardized requirement, how is the best approach. And again, as what Malaysia situation, if I could remember every of the panel saying that you are in the one agency. The challenge for Malaysia, we have dual agency. We are in Ministry of Health, but we have two different separate agency. So our challenge is definitely is communication, understood each other. So this is the thing that we still have to work out. But at the same time, so what we required for Malaysia situation to enhance more in terms of the knowledge, competency, understanding in this region. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All really good points. But it sounds like you're making some progress there. So thank you. And thank you all for your answering the questions so well. And now we're going to hand back to Ramar, who's going to take us through the Q&A session. So thank you.
Ramar, your microphone is on mute. Please turn it on. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, so the first question, if a product is classified as a drug device combination in EU and US, but not in China, like earlier mentioned by Chris, pre-filled pen injectors, will CMDE play a role in the review, even though the product is classified as a drug? Chris, you want to take that question?
Yeah, I think first of all, the China authority have some rules for the classification, and we need to, first of all, we need to define the classification for the product, so that we can define the submission pathway and the requirements. But however, if I think if we cannot define, it should be medical device or combination products or drug material, packaging material. And maybe we need to apply official authority definition. from the China authority. There's a working procedure for such an application. So with such an official decision, and we could know better and how to prepare the submission and what's the requirements. But however, I think for most of the cases, we have to communicate with the authority by case so that, to understand better the requirements.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris, for that. There is a second question. This is regarding, I think all of the panelists have touched upon diverging requirements and lack of predictability in terms of the processes and requirements. So the question is, if there are divergent requirements, how can IMDRF, WHO, and ICH support in this area? So panelists, anyone would want to jump in to share your thoughts on this first?
Well, I'm happy to jump in, but certainly I think they all have roles. IMDRF, obviously, in the device area, helps around a lot of those areas and the way they look at things. How well it works with combination products, I'm not sure. Certainly WHO and ICH or guidelines and things like that can certainly be of assistance. I mean, I think there are a number of guidelines, although people can have slightly different frameworks, which can be fairly useful as well. The FDA and EMA guidelines around some of these things probably do assist other regulators as well, and probably helps companies, sponsors who wish to put together submissions to different countries.
Oh, thanks, Tony, for that. Now we have another question, which is again about the divergent requirements, which seems to be a challenge that many of us are worried about. So how would such divergent requirements for combination products across the APAC region impact the use of reliance procedures? So any panelists would want to take a bite on this first?
Well, I'll step in while everyone else is thinking. I think the reliance procedures are sort of dependent again on the framework. So where there are common frameworks for bits of it, then I think the reliance frameworks can work. It's then where we have the divergent areas and places where there are different agencies involved probably do make it much harder for some of those reliance procedures. I mean, obviously we have a lot of even medical devices with the notified bodies, which are accepted by lots of the jurisdictions, lots of the different regulators, for instance. But I think, yeah, certainly it can impact the use, especially where there are those differences in actually the regulatory framework things have to go through.
Yeah, I'm jumping as well here a bit, if I may. Yeah, so in terms of the access sort of procedures, you sort of see them as sort of national procedures, but with elements that you can take from the other partners that relate to how you would do it in your regions. And there's always slight areas that one regulator will require versus another. So you kind of do have some elements that can be helpful in the collaboration, but there are also some elements that are unique to each agency, and then that agency will kind of assess their own parts of it. So it's not a complete solution, that's for sure, but there are elements of overlap where you can rely. So
yeah, thanks, Louis, for that. Totally, because for reliance, of course, having harmonized requirements and convergent approaches will go a long way in facilitating reliance, but there are also other mechanisms that can be used when we need to circumvent some of the differences that exist. So yeah, so that was a great point to bring up. There's another question, which is for MHRA and TGA, for similar size international agencies or LMIC agencies that want to develop a sophisticated medical device framework, including those for combinations. What would your advice be to consider building their medical devices and combo product frameworks. So yeah, Louis and Tony, you want to chime in?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's coming across to me is the fact that you've got, especially with the ATMPs, a lot of agencies don't have sort of experience in the regulation even of ATMPs or the assessment of ATMP dossiers themselves. And we're lucky at the MHRA because we do have, good experience in that area. So I think a lot of this is about kind of the training of the staff and bringing the expertise in-house, and being able to and also, Reliance can help in this area as well. I'm not sure I'm answering this question. And I think a big area is the classification issues, and when you classify something as a combination product or not, so then you can have the right regulatory regimes. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I lost the question a bit there. I don't know if Tony wants to jump in.
I think
that's some of my thoughts generally, really. Yeah.
I think not many regulators have a completely separate combination products framework. It's more, I think they have guidance or single entry points for combination products, but then they're still assessed through the medicine or the medical device, for instance, frameworks. They're not looked at totally different as a whole extra framework. I think the area there is that having a way, and be fair to say, we don't have a set way that way, although we're actually doing some work at the moment, as was mentioned by Kevin earlier, that we did put out for consultations and things around combination and boundary products. But a lot of it, I think, is nearly internal in how you deal with an application that comes in. And depending on your own legislation to which way you define it, but also then trying to ensure the different areas work together. So it's the interaction, because a specialist engineering skill is not going to sit in a medicines area. It sits in a device area, for instance. I think that to me is sort of, but building a medical device framework, I think would be a significant challenge if you don't have one.
Thanks, Tony, for that. Just I wanted to add a point because based on my experience working with HSA before my current job, I think what has worked, which is a very small, we started off as a small agency. So for medical devices, regulatory framework, what always worked is always trying to learn from best practices that's already out there, the tried and tested, our positive and negative approaches and methodologies. That is very important. And also to work in collaboration on international platforms, engaging with like-minded regulators. So these are some steps that will go a long way in building a reasonable medical device framework for such countries.
Yeah.
There's one more. Sorry. Yes.
I just wanted to jump in. So I find that there's an EU guideline, human cell-based medicinal products, which is kind of it's called the mother guideline, or was back then, in the EMA, and it's actually got the most detailed amount of guidance, if you like, about addressing, drug device combinations. It's actually quite good, and I refreshed myself before this meeting of that part of that guideline, and we recommend people to have a look at it. So I think that for me, that's the most detailed I know. I'm not so familiar with other regions and guidelines, but for me that's sort of the most detailed that's out there. Yeah. So
thanks, Louis. That's very useful. There's one more question very quickly. Let's touch on that from Edmund. As a chronic patient who requires effective biological therapy for the last few years, how can regulators of different jurisdictions come together to streamline the processes to allow me to access to more affordable, effective biologics every 3 months from my healthcare provider? I think before I pass off, just a quick comment is that all that we do it, be it manufacturers or regulators, is at the end is for the patients, for their access to essential medical therapy. So anyone want to chime in on this question? Any thoughts or comments? How can regulators of different jurisdictions come together to streamline processes to allow access for affordable, effective biologics?
So I think, so in the Australian setting, I always make the comment that TGA is cost agnostic for everything it does. Cost is not a factor in whether we approve a product or not, and it's left to other parts of government department to work out whether if they're going to fund them. So I think it might differ with some other regulators, but a lot of the time the funding is actually outside of the regulators, which makes the job of the regulators much easier around it. I think probably the only other one is the ability of two things: getting the product sponsors, manufacturers, to actually apply to different jurisdictions to supply and get approval to supply. Because in a lot of jurisdictions, unless things are approved, they can't get subsidised. I think that's one of the factors. Or having an access to products which aren't approved. And numerous jurisdictions have got different ways. We've got a couple of schemes where products we have not approved, have not come to us for approval, we can allow their supply into the country through separate pathways.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, for that. There's another question, but probably I will use that question to sum up some of the points that we've discussed before we move forward in the interest of time. So the question is on, again, for ATMPs, as they advance fast, will the panel anticipate development of more novel medical devices? I think it's more the question on more complexity in the medical devices, example for the capability delivery of gene therapy to the brain. So I think, yes, we do anticipate that, as you heard even from Kevin's presentation. And also when you look at the space out there, while we are talking about challenges and more looking for more harmonized regulatory frameworks, the challenge is also complicated because the device complexities are also increasing. So definitely, yes, that's one challenge that we have also kind of touched upon in the presentation and also during the discussions. So I think overall, today we have heard a lot of points and we have touched on various things that are positive and also things that we see that we can work on. Like, for example, there are some good practices in terms of probably talking to regulators early, having pre-submission meetings, closer engagement, working together in international fora, and then collaboration to develop common guidelines, frameworks, etc. And then there was also quite a bit of examples, positive examples, like having a dedicated office for combinations that has worked very well in terms of efficiency. And we also heard about certain aspects which are actually not working that well at this point in time, like having dual agency approaches that has kind of tends to complicate the process a little bit, and also sometimes adds in a little bit of less predictability in terms of the regulatory process. So we've had lots of valuable points discussed, but to me, I think overall, the 3 C's that I got was lingering here in everybody's mind was: one is collaboration, coordination, greater coordination, and of course, co-creation of solutions and harmonized approaches for combinations. Those seem to be the key points that we have heard through all the discussions so far. So I think now it's time for the poll. The question 3 poll, I think, will be launched shortly. And then I will now, as you work on the poll, I will also hand it over to Louise to share her summation and some key points on the discussion so far.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, you summed up quite a lot of it quite nicely there, Ramar. So I'm not sure I've really got much to add. I think a key element is obviously the different classifications. In some ways, we may not be able to. Oh, I see. Oh, you've made a slide of key takeaways there. Yes, of course. Let me just. just my own personal sort of views in addition to this is you know, that yes, the sort of lack of harmonization of when something is a drug device combination. You know, that's clear that there are different regulatory approaches to that. There will be some sort of limits to what we can do there, because there will be sort of regulatory and legal requirements that would be different. I thought it was an interesting point about from China, where you have the idea that you have it sort of coming together, doing the assessment at the same time rather than waiting for the device element then comes to the medicines element. I thought that was an interesting concept. So I will just go down and read these then. So although you can see them. So for both ATMPs and drug device combinations, regulatory frameworks are still developing worldwide. For ATMPs, there's ongoing global regulatory harmonization and convergence efforts, WHO, ICH, APEC, to manage the differences in the maturity of frameworks among countries. Opportunities for identifying best practice and development of harmonized guidelines and standards is crucial. For drug device combinations, there's a lack of common terminology, potential difficulties to classify and navigate different requirements for complex devices and drugs. Combined ATMPs are complex with specific scientific and regulatory challenges. This is indeed the case. Impact assessments of the device on the you know, the functionality of the cells. I guess biocompatibility would come into that, and obviously the GMP considerations. And there's a need for more global convergence, flexible regulatory pathways based on risk-based approach and regulatory reliance. Also importance of early scientific interactions between sponsors, manufacturers and regulators. This is very important, and this is something that's, you know, been the thread through this discussion. And again, you know, sharing expertise and best practice among regulators and all stakeholders. And again, that's also very crucial, because, you know, the regulators follow the science, if you like. You know, we learn as you develop. So you have to sort of take the regulator along with you, which is something that maybe you know, people may not sort of appreciate that element to it. So yeah, so thank you very much. It's been a great conversation we've had here today, and yeah, thank you, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Lewis and panelists.
Thank you.
With that, I'd like to hand over to Sarah and team.
Thank you to all of our speakers for their excellent presentation and the very comprehensive information shared today. The recording of these sessions will be available shortly on the IFPMA ARC website. Please come back tomorrow for the last day of the conference, which will be focusing on ICH, another day where we would be discussing the importance of harmonization of regulatory requirements. And before you leave, we value your feedback and would greatly appreciate if you could take a few minutes to fill in the short survey on your screen. So thank you to all of you who participated today, and many thanks also for the team that is working wonderfully behind the scene. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.